He went to war, and she stayed, to save him with love. A Sunday fair, laughter, music, the scent of bread and apples. Their eyes met, and the world grew quiet. He was a soldier. She didn't yet know love could hurt this deeply. Letters written at night, waiting wrapped in fear, and the call that shattered silence. He's alive, but wounded. Hospital corridors, whispers, her hand in his, steps that led back to life. He survived. They came home. No loud promises. Just one question. Will you stay, always? A quiet wedding after the war. One home, one love, one life. Years later, a terrace, a grandson, and a sky full of stars. Because true love doesn't end. It stays.
Love Stories Max. Welcome to my channel. Enjoy watching, friends.
Where war couldn't take love. I was already an old woman when my grandson Michael came to visit me. He was tall, a little awkward, with the same eyes Robert once had, the eyes that changed my entire life. That evening, we were sitting on the terrace. The wooden floor creaked softly. The air smelled of mint and freshly brewed tea, and somewhere in the distance the crickets were beginning their nightly concert. Michael was quiet for a long time, as if gathering his thoughts. Then he suddenly looked at me and asked, "Grandma, how did you meet Grandpa Robert?" I smiled, slowly, with the kind of smile that carries a whole lifetime inside it. I wrapped my hands around the warm cup and let memory open its doors. It was a Sunday, my dear, at the fair. I remember that day so clearly, as if it were yesterday. The sun was gentle, not burning, but kind, touching your cheeks and warming your soul. The Sunday fair spread across the town square, and there was life there, real, loud, colorful life. The air was filled with scents. Freshly baked bread with a crisp crust, honey, apples, cinnamon, and hot cider. Vendors called out cheerfully, laughing, coins clinked, live music played, a violin, slightly out of tune but sincere. Children ran around with paper balloons, women bargained, and men joked, pretending not to care. I was young then, wearing a simple light dress, my hair tied with a ribbon. I had come to the fair alone, just to look around, to feel the joy of an ordinary day. I was studying jars of jam when I suddenly felt someone's gaze on me. Not intrusive, calm. I turned, and saw him. Robert stood a little apart. In his military uniform, which fit him as if it were part of who he was. He wasn't trying to impress anyone, he simply was. Straight-backed, composed, with a faint smile at the corners of his lips and the eyes of a man who had seen more than he wished, yet hadn't lost his kindness. Our eyes met, and the fair seemed to fall silent. I remember my chest tightening, my heart skipping a beat and then racing, as if it suddenly remembered why it existed. He approached first, took off his cap, very politely, almost old-fashioned. "Good afternoon. May I invite you for a walk?" His voice was low and steady. The voice of a man you could trust. I nodded without even thinking. We walked between the stalls, and he listened to me so attentively, as if there were nothing in the world more important than my words. He told me he was in the military, that he would soon be leaving again. I stayed quiet, but in my heart I already knew. This man wasn't just a meeting. This was fate arriving quietly, without warning. He bought me a small bouquet of wildflowers, simple, yet so alive. And when he handed it to me, his fingers brushed mine. I remember that touch to this day. Then there were letters, long ones, Honest ones. Written at night between duty shifts. There were meetings, brief, yet filled with an entire world. There was waiting, fear, prayers, and hope. Robert taught me how to love not loudly, but deeply. Not to make easy promises, but to keep your word. He was my protection, my home, my peace. I fell silent. Michael sat very still, afraid to disturb the moment. "He loved you very much, didn't he?" he asked softly. I smiled through my tears. "He still loves me, my dear. It's just that now, it's from heaven." I looked up at the evening sky, where the first stars were appearing, and in that moment it seemed to me that one of them shone just a little brighter. Because true love does not end. It simply changes its form. You never learn about war from explosions. You learn about it from silence. That day, the silence was too loud. Robert didn't write. He didn't call. The mailman walked past our house, and my world seemed to tilt. I sat by the window, holding his last letter. The paper already soft from my hands, from rereading it, from hope. Then they came. 2 men in uniform. Polite, controlled. Their voices were far too steady to carry good news. "He's alive," they said. And for the first time in my life, I understood that the word alive can hurt. Robert was wounded during a combat shift. At night, an explosion, shrapnel, blood, dirt. He was taken to a military hospital. Far away, but he was alive. I barely remember the journey. The train rattled, people talked, someone laughed, and I clutched the small icon he once placed in my palm, saying, "Keep this. It knows how to help us find each other." The hospital smelled of medicine, alcohol, and fear. The corridors were long and cold, lit by pale lights that didn't bring comfort, only exhaustion. I walked slowly, afraid to hear his name spoken differently. When I saw him, my Robert lay almost motionless. Pale, his chest bandaged, one arm in a cast, his face marked with scratches. His strong shoulders looked far too fragile for that narrow bed. I sat beside him. I didn't cry. I simply took his hand. It was warm, alive. "I'm here," I whispered. "Do you hear me? I'm not going anywhere." Days in the hospital blended into one long breath. I learned to recognize the sound of his breathing among dozens of others. I knew when he was in pain, even when he stayed silent. I changed the water in the vase, wiped his forehead with a damp cloth, read him letters I never got the chance to give before. At night, I slept on a chair. My back ached, but I was afraid to leave. Afraid that if I let go of his hand even for a moment, he would disappear. Sometimes he woke up. His eyes were cloudy with pain. "Eli," he whispered. "I'm here," I answered every time, even when he drifted back to sleep. Once, he cried, "My strong, composed Robert. I don't know who I'll be now," he said. "I'm not the same man." I leaned closer, resting my forehead against his. "You're alive, and you're mine. That's enough." I learned to care for his body as gently as his soul. I helped him sit up, fed him with a spoon when his hand wouldn't obey, counted steps with him across the hospital room when he stood for the first time. 1, 2, 3. Each step was a small victory over death. There, among white walls and whispered doctors' voices, our love grew up. Not romantic, real, the kind that stays when pain refuses to leave. And I knew, if war hadn't taken him from me, nothing ever would. Recovery doesn't arrive all at once. It comes in steps, small ones, careful ones. The first day Robert managed to lift his cup on his own. His fingers trembled, and coffee spilled onto the sheets. He smiled awkwardly, almost apologetically, as if saying sorry for his weakness. I wiped the stain and said softly, "It's okay. We'll wash it." I was talking about the coffee. But we both knew I meant life. Then there were the stairs. 5 steps at the end of the corridor. He paused after each one, breathing hard, and I stood beside him, never rushing. My shoulder was there if he needed it, but I didn't hold him too tightly. I wanted him to know he could stand on his own. One morning, he asked to shave. I brought water, a towel, and the razor. His hands still didn't obey him fully, so I did it slowly, carefully, like a sacred ritual. When my fingers touched his cheek, he closed his eyes. "I was afraid you'd see me like this," he whispered. "I was only afraid of one thing," I replied. "That I'd never see you at all." When the doctors said he was recovering, I cried for the first time in a long while. Not from fear, from relief. The day he was discharged, there were no fanfares. Just an old military bus, a milky sky, and wind that smelled like home. I helped him into his coat, straightened his collar, as if trying to protect him from the whole world at once. The road home was long. Fields, trees, small stations passed by the window. Robert held my hand, squeezing my fingers from time to time, as if checking, "Is this really you?" When we arrived, the house welcomed us with silence. Warm, familiar, dust on the windowsill, the smell of wood and old memories in the air. I opened the windows and let the light in. That evening, we sat on the porch. The sun slowly sank, painting the sky gold. Robert was quiet for a long time. Then he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small box. "Worn, not new. I carried this through the entire war," he said. "I didn't know if I'd make it back. But I knew who I wanted to come back to." Inside was a simple ring. No stones, just thin gold, warm like his voice. "Elizabeth," he swallowed hard, "I can't promise an easy life. I can promise to stand beside you. Always. If you'll have me." I didn't let him finish. I nodded, touched his face, and whispered, "I'm already home. With you." He slid the ring onto my finger. His hands still trembled, but this time not from weakness. From happiness. That night, we slept without fear for the first time. And the war finally let us go. A year passed. A year in which we learned how to sleep without explosions in our dreams. A year in which silence stopped being frightening. A year in which Robert learned how to laugh again, not carefully, but freely. Our wedding was quiet. We didn't want loud music, fireworks, or long speeches. We wanted only one thing: to be alive together. It was early autumn. The air smelled of apples and damp earth after the night rain. I wore a simple dress, light, without a corset or train. Just soft fabric brushing my skin, and a small flower in my hair. Robert wore civilian clothes, a dark jacket, a light shirt. A scar still traced his arm, a quiet reminder of war. I touched it gently before the ceremony, and he smiled. "It's just a reminder that I came back," he said. We signed our marriage papers in a small room with only a few people. Those who knew our story without words. The witnesses stayed silent, giving us space for the moment. When he said, "I do," his voice trembled slightly. When I said, "I do," I realized I was no longer afraid of anything. After the ceremony, we returned home. I cooked dinner. Simple food: soup, fresh bread, herbal tea. Robert lit candles, their glow spilling warmly across the walls. We sat at the table, holding hands, and said nothing. Because sometimes silence is the fullest form of happiness. Later, he lifted me in his arms, carefully, as if afraid to disturb the moment. "We survived," he whispered. "We chose each other," I replied. That night, rain tapped softly against the windows, and I fell asleep knowing the war was behind us. And ahead of us was life. The evening was warm again. Those evenings come only when a life has been lived honestly. My grandson and I were sitting on the terrace. Michael gently swung his foot, holding an old blanket close to his chest, while I listened to the house breathe with me. Somewhere in the distance, crickets sang, and the air smelled of linden trees and memories. "Grandma," he said softly, "do you regret anything?" I looked at my hands. They were wrinkled now, marked by time, but the ring was still there on my finger. The same one, simple, worn. "No, my dear," I said, "because I lived my life with the man I loved." Michael looked at me with the seriousness only children have when they touch something real for the first time. "And Grandpa, was he happy?" I smiled and lifted my eyes to the sky. He was happy every morning he woke up at home. Happy when he held my hand. Happy because he came back from the war, and had time to live. The wind gently stirred the curtains. The terrace fell quiet, but it was a kind silence. "You know," I added, "true love doesn't shout. It simply stays." Michael leaned against my shoulder. I felt the warmth of his head and understood, love never disappears. It just keeps moving forward. When the first star appeared in the sky, I gave it a small nod. "See," I whispered, "he's here." And in that moment, I was at peace. Because the story that began at a Sunday fair ended at home.